My name is Lucretia, and I have been working in investments for almost 10 years, starting as a junior analyst, where day after day I pored over endless spreadsheets, reports, and boring presentations. And step by step, without missing a single opportunity, I worked my way up to the position of investment manager, paying for it with sleepless nights, weekends spent not in the company of friends or family, but surrounded by charts and dry financial forecasts. Last year was especially exhausting. I managed 3 large acquisitions at once, which the CEO of our company himself called transformational. And at some point, I thought that the stress would finally break me, that I would not endure. But when bonuses came, comparable to what others earn over many years, it all suddenly seemed worth it. Last Thursday, while looking over my bills over my morning coffee, I froze mid-sip because for the first time in a long time, I saw clearly that between my regular paycheck and my recent bonuses, there was enough money to fulfill a lifelong dream. Not a trip, not a new apartment, but something much more important. My parents lived in an old house on Cedar Street, a house that had not really been a home in the true sense of the word for a long time. The roof leaked every time it rained, the foundation was covered with new cracks, the heating worked poorly, and I remembered how my mother always wrapped herself in 2 sweaters in the winter, and my father sat with a hot water bottle at his feet, hiding his discomfort with the usual jokes. They always refused my offers to help, dissuaded me from renovating, claiming that it was a waste of money, and flatly refused to move, explaining everything by financial difficulties. But that day, I didn't think twice. I grabbed the phone and called my friend Agatha, who works as a realtor, and without further ado, I blurted out, "I need a house." She laughed and said, "Well, hello to you too, Lucretia. Are you tired of your apartment in the center?" And I, without wasting any time, clarified, "Not for myself, for my parents. I need something small but sturdy in a quiet area, with shops and clinics nearby and with a yard. Mom loves gardening, and Dad with his arthritis will be better off without stairs." Agatha worked quickly. Just a few days later, she showed me the perfect place, a 1-story ranch-style house in Oakwood, a quiet suburb with good schools, clean streets, and friendly neighbors, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a garden plot where we could arrange beds, flower beds, and even put in a gazebo. The price was $385,000, a lot, but my bonuses allowed me to pay for everything in cash. The deal was done in record time. The process was completed on Tuesday. I signed the paperwork on Wednesday, and 3 weeks later, I had the keys. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted it to be a real surprise for my parents. On Saturday, I arrived for our usual family dinner. Everyone was supposed to be at the house: my sister Anna, her husband Maurizio, and their 5-year-old daughter Lily. Anna and I had never been particularly close. I was always practical and collected, while she was emotional, impulsive, rushing from one apartment to another, changing jobs, never finding stability. My mother met me at the door with her strong hug and said, "Lucretia, you're early this time. Help me finish my potatoes." The house smelled of stewed meat and cinnamon, the aromas of childhood that invariably brought back a feeling of coziness, despite the peeling wallpaper and the ceiling threatening to collapse. Dad was sitting in his old chair watching baseball and rubbing his knees as usual. When he saw me, he chuckled, "So, how's your investment world going?" And without waiting for an answer, added, "The nursing home is boring as hell. Your mother is threatening to throw me a party, but fixing up this old dump is pointless. The to-do list is endless, and it's of little use." The doorbell rang, announcing Anna's arrival, and a moment later, little Lily, squealing with delight, flew off her chair and was the first to rush to the door, her ringing laughter echoing down the narrow hallway before she was at my feet, clutching my skirt tightly as if she were afraid I would disappear if I let go of her hand. Maurizio, tall and always slightly aloof, nodded to me with obliging politeness, and without wasting any time, headed for the kitchen, where he already knew that a bottle of beer was waiting for him in the fridge. And Anna appeared in the doorway with her usual theatrical grace, cast a quick glance at me, gave me a formal hug, and sliding her eyes over my blouse, said with a hint of curiosity, "A beautiful blouse? Probably expensive? I grinned and lied that I had bought it on sale because I saw no point in explaining that it was the latest Burberry collection, bought in a moment of weakness after the closing of a deal that had brought me sleepless nights and large sums of money. Dinner proceeded with its usual intrigue. Mom was constantly fussing with pots and plates, ladling out new portions of stewed meat and potatoes. Dad, sitting at the head of the table, was retelling the latest gossip about the neighbors with the same intonation as if he were reading the morning financial news. Anna, with fire in her eyes, was once again describing her last job prospect, which, as she assured us, would certainly be successful this time, although we had heard the same thing dozens of times. And I sat quietly, feeling how the envelope with documents was literally burning a hole in my purse, preventing me from concentrating on either the taste of the food or the conversation. When Mom began to clear the first plates, I stood up and, feeling that my heart was beating too loudly, said, "I have something for all of you." Well, for Mom and Dad, to be more precise. Anna looked up sharply, a strain in her gaze, but she said nothing, only pressed her lips together. I pulled out the envelope and handed it to my father. He fiddled with the clasp for a moment, as if hoping to gain a few extra seconds. My mother leaned over his shoulder, and I saw her brows furrow as the lines of the contract appeared on the white sheets. "What is this?" she whispered, and my father, equally confused, added, "Apparently it's a house?" I nodded and said, "Just your house if you want it. It's paid for, no mortgage, in Oakwood, near the mall and the medical plaza, 3 bedrooms all on one level. And Mother, there's a garden, facing due south, perfect for your beds and flowers." The silence was so thick that I could hear the hands of the old clock on the wall jumping from minute to minute. Mom raised her hand to her lips, and Dad stared at the papers, unblinking. "I don't understand," Mom finally whispered, and I confirmed, "Yes, the house. I bought it for you. You deserve a good place to retire, where it's safe, cozy, and where the walls aren't about to fall on your heads." I took out my phone and scrolled through the photos. A spacious living room, a bright kitchen, bedrooms, and finally, a garden, green and open, as if painted for a new life. Mom couldn't take it anymore. The tears started flowing, and Dad, who always held himself firmly, suddenly swayed too, wiping his eyes with his palm, and they both stood up and hugged me so tightly that I almost lost my balance. Over their shoulders, I saw Anna's face. Her smile was too forced, as if painted, and in her eyes there flashed a shadow that she was trying to hide. Maurizio cleared his throat, looked away, and took a long sip of beer, clearly unsure of what to do with himself at the moment. "Lucrezia," Anna finally said, her voice almost level, but I caught the slightest hesitation. "This is really something. Congratulations to Mom and Dad." But the congratulations hung in the air, empty, formal, and her smile never reached her eyes. The next day, just before dawn, I picked up my parents to show them their new house. Dad sat next to me in the passenger seat, unusually silent, only occasionally adjusting the collar of his shirt and nodding to himself, while Mom, in the back seat, kept repeating over and over, "I still can't believe it's true." Our own house, and in the same neighborhood where my book club friend is from, she always brags about how beautiful the view is. When we pulled up to the house, Mom gasped. It wasn't a fancy mansion, but after their old, crumbling place, it was a real palace of red brick with white trim, a covered porch big enough to fit 2 rocking chairs, and a neatly trimmed lawn. "Is this our house?" Dad asked quietly, and I handed him the keys, saying, "All yours. I want to do you the honor." His hand shook slightly as he inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The hallway opened into a spacious living room with large windows flooded with morning light, and Mom, with a joyful cry, rushed forward, touching the countertops with her hands, opening and closing the cabinets in the kitchen, checking the faucet and the dishwasher, as if she were afraid that all this would disappear if she didn't make sure of its reality. Dad walked slowly from room to room, running his palms along the door frames and walls, as if testing their strength, and then, going out into the yard, he stopped for a long time, looking at the garden plot. Mom joined me and, barely catching her breath, immediately began making plans. Here I'll plant cucumbers along the fence, and there some zucchini and perhaps some tomatoes next to the greenhouse. And we also need marigolds. They will scare away pests, and flowers, so that it will look beautiful. And right there we'll put a small table and 2 chairs for morning coffee. We spent the next hour going through each room, and I could see my mother's eyes growing brighter as she pointed out where the armoire would go, where the sofa would go, and which wall absolutely had to be painted lime green because it would go well with the view out the window onto the garden, and my less enthusiastic father, who was most concerned with the water heater and the furnace, checking them with the same meticulousness with which he had inspected every little thing in the house all his life, and finally nodding with satisfaction and saying, "Now that's something else. It's well made, not like the junk we've had to deal with before." My mother, still looking at me, asked eagerly, "So when can we move in?" And I smiled, feeling a warm joy spread through my chest at her words, and said, "Whenever you want, it's all ready. The utilities are connected. Everything is in your names. The first year's property taxes are paid by me, too." A week later, I took a rare day off from work to help with the move myself, although I had hired professional movers in advance. But I wanted to be there because I knew Dad hated accepting help almost as much as he hated change, and I expected him to grumble, which was always louder than any words of thanks. The movers arrived promptly at 8 in the morning, and by noon most of my parents' things were neatly packed and loaded into the truck, although to be honest, there wasn't much to save. The old furniture was long gone, the appliances barely worked, but Mom and Dad insisted on moving them too. By the end of the day, we were in the new house, me directing the movers where to put the furniture, and Mom rushing from room to room, giving out instructions and ideas as if years of pent-up energy had finally found an outlet. Dad looked stunned, and I found him sitting on the porch, staring at the truck. "Are you okay?" I asked, sitting down next to him. He took a deep breath and said, "A lot of changes today. Good changes, though." He paused and nodded slowly. "Yes, good changes, just too many at once." He patted my hand and added, "I'm proud of you, Lucretia. You did better than I ever could." That evening, when the movers had left and none of us had the energy to cook, we ordered pizza. I was helping Mom make the beds while Dad grumbled about setting up the TV, insisting that technology had only gotten more complicated with age. And in passing, I asked, "What are you going to do with the old house?" Mom sighed, breaking off a slice of pizza, and said, "We'll put it up for sale. I don't think anyone will want to buy it unless it's for the land. This area has been in decline for a long time." I tried to cheer her up. "Maybe someone will surprise you, although frankly, I doubt it. The crime rate is too high and there are no amenities." Mom just shrugged and said, "Whatever we get will be a nice extra cash, especially since property taxes and insurance are higher here, even considering you paid for the first year." Over the next few months, I threw myself into work. Meridian had a new major client with a complicated portfolio that needed restructuring, and I was determined to close a deal that could be my next career breakthrough. Late meetings gave way to morning calls, strategy sessions took up weekends, and I was able to call my parents only once a week and visit them twice a month at most. Every time I visited, I noticed how the house was becoming more and more like their home. Mom had planted a garden, as she had promised, and was already proudly picking the first vegetables, showing me baskets of cucumbers and lettuce. Dad had set up a workshop in the garage and started making birdhouses, which he sold at the local farmers market. They both looked happier and healthier than I remembered them from many years ago. During one of our rare calls, Mom casually mentioned that Anna had started visiting them very often. Almost every weekend she came with Lily, and added with genuine joy, "It's so nice to have them nearby. Lily loves to help me in the garden. She carries a watering can, picks flowers, sometimes just runs around the yard and laughs." I replied, "That's great," and tried to hide the slight pang of jealousy that I felt. Of course, I was glad that Anna was spending time with our parents, but somewhere inside me, The thought that she had the opportunity to be with them so often while my career kept me at a distance was scratching unpleasantly. Mom continued, Anna even said that she might be looking for a new apartment soon. The landlord is raising the rent again, and Maurizio was laid off from work. I tensed up and asked, perhaps more sharply than I should have, is she implying that she needs money? Mom quickly countered, No, not at all. I'm just thinking out loud. You know how Anna is. She always says more than she should and always seems like she has a plan. I knew that my sister had never been good with money, much less good at planning ahead. Every few months she found herself in some kind of financial crisis that usually required my intervention and my wallet, and this responsibility seemed to have long been assigned to me, although no one formulated it out loud. Well, tell her to call me if she needs help with a deposit or rent or anything, I said, trying to hide my irritation, and my mother looked at me warmly and said, You're a good sister, which sounded more like consolation than recognition to me, because deep down I wasn't sure I was, even though I was trying so hard to be one. 3 months passed in a blur of endless meetings, presentations, late nights at the office, and rare dreams that seemed to become an extension of the spreadsheets and numbers. I had landed a big client, the one I'd been working on for weeks, and that meant a new, significant bonus that should have made me happy, but it also stole what little free time I had left. I called my parents when I could, and the calls became shorter and shorter, but they remained warm because they seemed to fit into the new routine with an ease that both pleased and surprised me. Dad joined a veterans group at the local community center, where he not only made friends, but also rediscovered the joys of long conversations and board games. And Mom joined a gardening club that she talked about so enthusiastically that I could almost see her beaming face over the phone. One Tuesday evening, as I was finally getting ready to head home after a 14-hour day at work, my phone buzzed with a text from Anna. My birthday is at Mom and Dad's next Saturday at 6 p.m. Family and some friends will be there. I frowned at the screen because Anna hadn't mentioned planning a party during our last awkward coffee meeting 2 weeks ago. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Her cramped one-bedroom apartment with Maurizio had long been too small even for the three of them, and my parents' new house had a spacious living room and a well-kept backyard that were perfect for gatherings like this. I spent the next few days agonizing over what to get Anna, going through options and rejecting them one by one until I finally settled on a tall coffee maker that could grind beans and make everything from strong espresso to smooth iced coffee. Anna was obsessed with coffee and complained endlessly about her cheap coffee maker, so this seemed like the perfect solution, thoughtful and useful. When Saturday came, I pulled up to my parents' house a little after 6, and from the street I could see that the driveway and almost the entire street were lined with cars, as if the entire block had gathered for a party. Grabbing the box containing the coffee maker, carefully wrapped in gift paper, from the passenger seat, I headed inside without knocking, although it still felt weird to do so in their new home every time. The living room was full of people, mostly relatives I'd seen at parties and family gatherings, but also a few of Anna's friends whose faces I vaguely remembered from years ago. The centerpiece was a long table laden with food, home-cooked snacks interspersed with restaurant fare, and in the corner a portable speaker was playing softly. I spotted Anna right away. She sat at the head of the table, her posture relaxed and confident, Maurizio at her side, gesturing animatedly as he told a story to a group of laughing, nodding listeners, giving my sister the air of a hostess, radiant and collected. My parents, on the other hand, were keeping to themselves, my mother serving drinks, my father adjusting something on the kitchen table, and there was a nervousness in their movements that was noticeable. "Lucrezia!" my mother exclaimed, noticing me, and hurried toward me, as if she were afraid I would disappear if I didn't come up to her. "You did it! Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, but her gaze darted around the room, never stopping on my face, as if she were looking for something or someone else. "Your father is roasting those very corn cobs you like. Better get some before they're gone. she added hastily, and before I could ask what was wrong with her, she'd already turned away to fill someone's glass. I put the gift down with the others and walked around the room, greeting relatives, listening to congratulations on buying a house for my parents, although each time these words made me feel a little awkward because the house had been bought by me, but now it belonged to them, and all the praise seemed to have lost its correct addressee. Dinner was served buffet style, and in the end I found myself between Aunt Orsola and Uncle Antonio, who were enthusiastically talking about their recent trip on a cruise to Alaska, and at the same time asking me about work. And I, nodding and smiling, glanced at my parents more and more often. With each passing hour, their anxiety became more noticeable. Dad kept glancing at his watch, as if he was waiting for something or someone, and Mom nervously fidgeted with her napkin, squeezing it until her knuckles were white. Anna, on the other hand, looked absolutely calm, laughing loudly, pouring wine for her friends, her voice spreading throughout the room, attracting attention. After dinner, a beautiful cake from an expensive bakery across town, decorated with cream roses, appeared, and I found myself thinking that my sister, who had recently complained about her constant financial difficulties, was now demonstrating a luxury and confidence that seemed to have nothing in common with her usual helplessness. Anna announced that it was time for presents, and with the air of a hostess, she sat at the head of the table, while the others gathered around to watch her demonstratively animated reactions. How she tore the wrapping paper with exaggerated excitement, exclaimed like a child who saw a long-awaited toy, and did not forget to thank everyone, while embracing the givers so expansively as if the whole evening had been arranged only for this scene. When the last package was opened and a wave of artificial delight swept through the room, I thought that now the party would finally begin to die down, but instead of calming down, the atmosphere changed dramatically. My father cleared his throat, stood up with a glass of wine in his hand, and my mother, as if having gathered strength, stood next to me, and in their faces nervousness and firm determination were strangely intertwined. "We have one more announcement to make," my father said, and his voice shook slightly, but he still continued. "Barbara and I have talked and decided to give this house to Anna and Maurizio." At first I thought I had misheard, but the deathly silence that hung for a second and then gave way to a hum of confused whispers and heavy looks from relatives, translated to me, confirmed that every word was spoken seriously. My mother stepped forward and, avoiding my direct eye contact, added, "We've signed the papers. The house will be transferred to Anna next week." And only then did she finally meet my gaze, and there was something almost pleading in her expression, as if she were asking me to take this blow in silence. I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach, my breath caught for a second, but Anna, on the contrary, not at all surprised, as if she had known about what was happening in advance, jumped up and rushed to her parents, hugging them with tears of gratitude, calling their act the best gift in the world. Maurizio stood nearby, beaming a wide smile, shaking my father's hand, and the guests shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, throwing glances in my direction in which one could guess sympathy and at the same time some kind of quiet relief, as if they understood that they had witnessed something painful and familially awkward. Everyone knew I was the one who had bought this house only a few months ago, and I was the one who had put almost everything I had into it. I stood up, feeling my legs buckling, and keeping my voice from shaking, said, "Okay, can I talk to you alone?" My parents, Anna, and I walked into the kitchen, and the guests pretended to be engrossed in the remains of the dessert, although each ear was listening to our steps. As soon as the door closed, I couldn't resist asking directly, "I bought this house for you, and you—" But my mother quickly interrupted. "We appreciate it, Lucrezia. But now it's our house, and we can do with it what we see fit. You've owned it for 3 months now," I exclaimed. "I spent almost $400,000 so that you would have a safe and comfortable place to retire, not so that you could give it away." "Anna is not throwing us out," my father interjected defensively. "We are still going to live here until we decide what the next steps should be. And then—" "This is your forever home, Anna." And he turned to his sister with an expression in which I saw something like pride. Anna came closer to me and, putting on a mask of sympathy in which, however, there was no trace of real concern, said softly, "Lucretia, you need to calm down. Mom and Dad made a decision, and if you were truly generous, you would be happy for me. Lily has a family, and she deserves a good home to grow up in." I felt my blood boil. "Who has been helping you all these years?" I answered, barely keeping my voice in check. "Who paid every time you needed money for rent or to fix the car or to pay for Lily's tuition? It was always me." "That's different," my mother interjected, her voice suddenly cold, a voice I'd never heard before. "They were handouts, quick fixes, so you didn't have to really get involved in our lives." I froze, not believing what I was hearing. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "I bought you a house, and I've only been here a few times since you moved in because I've been working, because someone had to pay for it all." My father shook his head and said, "Anna comes over a few times a week. She brings Lily, they have dinner with us, they help around the house when I don't have time. And you're always busy." "Someone has to make money to make all this possible," I said, but my father didn't seem to hear. "If you cared about your sister the way you say you do about us, you'd buy her a house, too. You know they lived paycheck to paycheck in that tiny apartment." I looked at everyone's faces. Anna's barely contained triumph, my father's stubborn defensiveness, my mother's cold disapproval, and the full weight of betrayal crashed down on me at once. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice hollow. "You're right, Mom. It's your house, and you can do whatever you want with it." I turned and walked back into the living room, grabbed my purse from the sofa, nodded curtly to the remaining guests, some of whom tried to stop me with worried questions, but I didn't answer a word and headed for the door, beyond which the night began, alien and cold, like the house that until recently I considered my gift of love. I heard Anna say something about me. Her voice sounded deliberately loud so that everyone around could hear, and after a few seconds, a dramatically strained laugh rang out, from which my chest tightened unpleasantly, as if even the walls of the house were now laughing at me. The next morning, my phone rang before I'd even taken a sip of coffee, and the screen flashed with names: Cousin Beatrice, Aunt Orsola, Uncle Antonio, each calling to check on me and express their disbelief that my parents could actually do such a thing as hand over the house I'd bought for their retirement to my sister and her husband. Over the next few weeks, the phone rang constantly. My parents called every day, sometimes multiple times, but I let each call go to voicemail. The messages would start out apologetic, with my mother sounding desperate and trying to explain that it was all for the good of the family. Then they would become irritated, with reproaches for not calling back and for being selfish. And finally, they would sink into a heavy sense of guilt, with my father quietly and tiredly saying that they missed me and that I should understand their choice. I listened to each message, but I couldn't bring myself to call back because there were no words left inside me that would make sense to say, because everything that needed to be said had already been said that evening. I threw myself into my work, clinging to it as if it were my salvation, and this forced obsession brought its own strange benefits. 60-hour work weeks turned into 80-hour work weeks. I took on clients that colleagues refused, agreed to business trips that stretched for days and weeks, and any burden so as not to sit alone in my empty apartment, where the walls reminded me of betrayal and the silence sounded louder than any words. Half a year flew by in this blinding whirlwind of work and fatigue. Autumn imperceptibly gave way to winter, the first frosts, early twilight, streets decorated with garlands that seemed mockingly joyful when I returned home in the dark. I declined an invitation to come to my parents for Thanksgiving and did not even bother to come up with a good reason, because the very thought of sitting at the same table with Anna was unbearable. I decided to spend Christmas alone, already imagining how I would buy a ticket to Bali, where the sound of the surf would drown out all memories, and I would not have to look at the faces of those who preferred my sister to me. By this time, my parents' calls became rare. First once every few days, then only twice a week, as if they, too, were tired of knocking on a closed door. But one Tuesday evening in December, I came home from work to find them standing outside the apartment building, suitcases at their feet, looking old and tired and out of place against the stark modernist architecture in the dim light of the street lamp, as if they had accidentally wandered in from another time. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not even trying to hide the cold, and my mother clasped her hands and said, barely audibly, "We need to talk to you, please." I sighed heavily and led them upstairs, though every fiber of my being protested. They exchanged anxious glances as they entered the apartment, and then my mother said, "We were hoping we could stay with you for a while until we found our own place." I stared at her in disbelief, not immediately believing what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I asked, but my father, holding my gaze, added, "We had to leave the house. Anna and Maurizio were renovating it, and there wasn't enough room for all of us." "So," I said slowly, feeling my anger boiling up, "you gave them my house, and now you have nowhere to live?" My mother quickly added, "We rented an apartment with the money we got from selling our old house, but the lease is up next week and we can't afford to renew. Your father got a job in a hardware store, but the pay is low." "No," I said firmly. "What do you mean, no?" My mother protested, but I repeated, "I mean, no, you can't stay here. I bought you a nice house for you to live in peace and you gave it away. It's not my problem." My mother's face crumpled, as if under the weight of a blow. "How can you be so heartless after everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me lately?" I asked, my voice ringing with suppressed rage. "Besides throwing my gift in my face and accusing me of not being generous enough, you call me cruel, Mother, and I call it realism. I already solved your housing problem when I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, and what did I get in return? Only criticism and ingratitude. It won't be like that anymore." My father clenched his fists and asked wearily, "Where should we go?" "How about Anna's house?" I answered coldly. "The same one that used to be yours, the one I bought. Surely your beloved daughter will be able to find a corner for her beloved parents." They exchanged glances, and in that look there was helplessness, anxiety, and something else that resembled shame. "Anna says there is no room because of the renovation," Mother muttered, but I only shrugged. "Then it's a matter between you and Anna. It's not my problem anymore." I walked up to the door and held it, watching my parents stand in the hallway, as if unable to believe that their own daughter was actually throwing them out, and we looked at each other for what felt like an eternity before they finally picked up their suitcases, silently packed everything they owned, and left without saying a word, leaving behind a heavy, ringing silence. They left, and in that silence I suddenly felt relief, almost physical lightness, although something like bitterness remained in my soul along with it. I dialed Anna's number, and she answered only on the fourth ring, her voice sounding lazy and cold, as if I had interrupted something much more important than a conversation with my sister. "Mom and Dad just showed up at my apartment expecting to move in," I said without preamble, and I heard her dismissive laugh over the phone. "I wouldn't say we kicked them out," she said with studied indifference. "We're just turning the spare room into a real playroom for Lily. They could stay, but it would be cramped. And after all, this is our house. It's ours now, not theirs." I reminded her that I was the one who bought the house, that it was a gift from my parents, that I never intended to give it to her and her husband. Anna interrupted me. "I don't need another lecture from you, Lucrezia. They gave us the house themselves, end of story, and if you care so much about where they live, why don't you just let them stay?" She hung up before I could respond, and in that moment I felt like the last thing between me and my sister had been cut off. I immediately blocked her number because I couldn't stand her voice, her mockery, or her self-righteousness any longer. The next day, Cousin Beatrice called, her voice soft but full of confusion, and she told me that my parents had moved to a small one-room apartment in a less prestigious area of the city, that my father had taken a second job as a night security guard, and that my mother was unsuccessfully looking for a job as a cashier in a store. They tell everyone that it's your fault for turning them down in their time of need, Beatrice said carefully. Let them say what they want, I replied, feeling some old but unnecessary knots tightening inside me. I know the truth, whatever it is. Most of the family is on your side, Beatrice added. We've all seen what you've done for them and how they've treated you. 6 months had passed since then. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Anna, and all I knew about them came to me through the occasional family letters, which included complaints about financial difficulties, but never the slightest hint of an admission of error. Anna and Maurizio continued to enjoy the spacious house, my gift, as if it had always been theirs by right, and at the same time they continued to slander me to anyone who would listen, repeating the same story about the cruelty of an ungrateful daughter. Sometimes I found myself wondering if I should have done something differently, if I should have noticed the warning signs of my family's true nature earlier, been less generous, or, on the contrary, more persistent in my expectations and conditions. But every time I came to the same conclusion. I did the right thing by buying a house for my parents when I believed that I was doing the best for them, and I did the right thing when I refused to give in to further manipulation. I was tired of sacrificing myself for people who could not even acknowledge the fact of this sacrifice. From that moment on, I began to say no more often, not only to my family, but also at work, learned to defend my boundaries, stopped being afraid of seeming cold or harsh. I began going to drawing classes on weekends, and this became a quiet refuge for me, where color and line replaced words and allowed the soul to breathe. I joined a group of amateur tourists with whom I went out of town, met new people, laughed, discovered simple joys, and among these people, someone new appeared, someone who respected my time, valued my boundaries, and did not expect me to sacrifice. This Christmas, I will go to New Zealand, not Bali, and most importantly, I will not be alone.